Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano, I'm glad you could be here. And the increasing instability around the world, it continues to expand. We are potentially witnessing the beginnings of a new civil war in the Sudan. And we started to evacuate the embassy, but there are still Americans that are stuck there. They're stuck behind the lines. And I just hope and pray that they don't get the Afghanistan treatment. Because this administration, they have an obligation to get Americans out, but we saw what happened in Afghanistan. Hopefully there's not a repeat. Unfortunately, I think there may be, because we're already getting reports that the government, the Biden administration, has stated that they don't have plans to evacuate anyone else. But the situation is starting to spiral out of control, and we need to watch about this. And I routinely speak about the continued destabilization of the international community because of the lack of American leadership. But here with the Sudan, it's not really new for them. I don't think this has much of an impact overall, except that if we see a massive refugee crisis, if the situation gets out of control in the Sudan, it could destabilize neighboring countries. And the country I would be most concerned about is Ethiopia, given their recent problems. I think the main question when it comes to the Sudan is wondering whether this will devolve into what we saw in the 1990s when a genocide occurs. But it remains to be seen. I'll keep you posted if there's any major developments. As far as the domestic front, I am working on an episode for Wednesday. I want to focus on the recent revelations regarding the Biden administration and how thoroughly corrupt they are, how thoroughly corrupt the system is. So make sure you click the follow button and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, don't forget to visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with family, friends, and on social media. For today, I have a great guest coming in. And I want to get set to welcome Steve Deace, the renowned author, executive producer, host of the Blaze's Steve Deace Show. I want to focus the conversation on what appears to be the collapse of our society and how it's happening so rapidly. Steve is the executive producer of a new movie, Nefarious. It's based on a novel he wrote, a nefarious plot. He's also the author of Rise of the Fourth Reich, Confronting COVID Fascism with a New Nuremberg Trial so this never happens again, and it cannot happen again. We cannot allow it to happen again. So I want to welcome Steve to the PAS Report. Steve, glad you could join me. How are you today?
I am very busy, but the right kind of busy when you have a movie out, brother. Thank you for having me.
That's great. So tell the audience. So Nefarious, doing well at the box office. What's it about?
So we made a prequel movie to my 2016 book, A Nefarious Plot, which was kind of my sequel homage to the C.S. Lewis classic, The Screwtape Letters. And in the movie, you're going to learn the origin of the demonic manuscript. Where did the book, A Nefarious Plot, come from? And the MacGuffin that we use to get you to that ending is there is a notorious serial killer on death row in Oklahoma named Edward Wayne Brady, because it is a law that all serial killers have to have three names, apparently. And he is awaiting his execution. He's exhausted a decade of appeals. And on the final day, he tries one last Hail Mary pass that he can't be executed because he did these deeds when he was demonically possessed and not of his own free will. And of course, everybody thinks that this is just his, attempt at an insanity plea. And so the court appoints an atheist psychiatrist to go and do the evaluation, because apparently, unless you hire Jordan Peterson, those are the only kind of psychiatrists we have these days. And he comes in thinking that this is just an act. It's not real. He's pretty smug, typical atheist. I know that I've got all the answers. I figured it all out. And by the end of this movie, this demon is going to absolutely wreck his worldview and force him to reconsider how the universe truly operates and his place in it. And that's a pretty good elevator pitch summation of our movie.
And from there, when we look at faith and the role it plays throughout our society, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's politics, whether it's within the community, what have you noticed over the last few years regarding the idea of faith?
We are fulfilling G.K. Chesterton's axiom that whenever governments remove the God, the governments become the God. There is this idea of human and therefore human engineered institutions reaching nirvana, utopia, the top of Maslow's hierarchy. We are the summit. We are the people we've been waiting for. Go get the best of us, and all the answers to the secrets of the universe will be unlocked. I'll just give you an example from just today on my show over on the Blaze. I was pointing out, listen, I love what Elon Musk has done with Twitter. I love the fact that he's disrupting the hell out of corporate legacy spirit of the age media. But I'm not worried about Chat GP and its left-wing bias. Everybody that goes to that thing knows it's a political joke. You're either a fetishist for it, or you know that, meaning that it's your feedback loop. It's giving you the narrative you want, or it's biased against you, and so you can respond accordingly. What scares the hell out of me is what Elon Musk told Tucker Carlson he wanted to establish. His own GP that would seek out ultimate truth and the secrets of the universe. Well, any algorithm, these things don't happen organically. They don't just fall from the sky. They're programmed, they're coded, and they have a programmer, a coder, and his or her assumptions are built into them. So whom among us as a mere human is qualified to determine the parameters in a code to a machine on how to recognize ultimate truth and find it when and if it's found? The answer is no one. To me, I find that a hell of a lot more scarier than the current Chat GP, MSNBC as an algorithm nonsense. Okay, and that's the stuff that sort of utopianism in our institutions and in ourselves is one of the things, frankly, we saw the last few years with COVID. Unassailable experts. There couldn't no longer do you get a second opinion. I mean, we don't even have to test vaccines to see if they will inoculate you now, and then we'll admit to you a year and a half later, well, they were never meant to actually stop the spread of the vaccine, even though we mandated them so you couldn't work without it in order to allegedly stop the spread of the virus. I mean, you get here with this kind of elitism because of what I'm talking about. And this is the lack of a recognition of a creator removes much of the humility that we have as humans. And so something has to fill that space, that Blaise Pascal God-shaped hole in the heart. And so when we remove God from that hole, we put ourselves in there.
Yeah, I completely agree, because it's a void. And so government comes in to fill that void. But what I can't understand, so our founding fathers, brilliant men, understood that human beings are flawed. Everything they create is going to be flawed, including governments. Governments can't even fix potholes right. Mm-hmm. And yet we're supposed to expect them to solve all the problems. And when we look at the trillions of dollars that have been pumped to solve these problems, all it's done is empower the government. And can you name for me any problem that they actually solved?
No. And this is what's always funny too. This is the dichotomy. It's its own fallacy, self-contained fallacy. This idea that human beings can't make their own decisions, therefore they need other human beings who can't make their own decisions to make their decisions for them. All right, because if you belong to the right group, if you have the approved, if you accept the approved narrative. The minute you put on any sort of identification that you work for any sort of government or public institution in good standing, meaning compliant with the current regime, suddenly all the frailties of human nature that we all acknowledge are there, otherwise, you're suddenly absolved. You tiptoe between the raindrops. You see the forest and the trees. Forget the forest through the trees. You see it all. You're omniscient. You're omnipresent. You're a God-like being. And so you wouldn't possibly be tempted by corruption with all that taxpayer money filtering through your agency and organization and your fingertips constantly, and the lack of accountability that goes along with it. You wouldn't be of course, Anthony Fauci wouldn't be tempted at all with massive investments into all these big pharma companies when there might be cheap drugs on the market that, if used early enough and cost about 10 cents a pill, might actually mitigate against the worst symptoms of COVID. So instead, he wants you to buy his buddy over at Gilead's remdesivir that has a black box warning and makes your kidneys fail, but doesn't solve your COVID problem. No, of course, he's above all that. He's unassailable, right?
Well, he's the embodiment of science, like he said,
yes,
right?
I am the science. Yes, like Palpatine, I am the science, right? Yes, I mean that is what we're dealing with here. Is what's more dangerous than thinking human beings aren't naturally good, aren't naturally sinful, aren't basically good, or is what's even more, or what's more dangerous than not accepting that is thinking that only some human beings are sinful and not basically good, because you always make you and the group you're in exempt from that. And that's always where tyranny comes from next.
Well, and using the title of your book, it's nefarious what's going on.
Yeah.
I just had a piece published by Fox News I wrote talking about how the National Science Foundation is awarding $5 million to the University of Wisconsin to develop an AI program that tracks misinformation and corrects it. And it's going into every single newsroom at the far left media outlets. They want to roll it out into every newsroom. Government has been the largest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation, and you wrote a whole book about it and how to prevent it going forward. Can you explain to the audience how to prevent the fascism going forward?
There is only one way. I'm just not sure, brother, that we have the stomach, the testicular fortitude for it. And when the greatest generation saw where this kind of government misinformation, classification of some people as better and more special than others, fully Orwellian now, where at first you gain power by saying 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And then once you have power, you say 4 legs are good, but 2 legs are even better. All right. I mean, this ultimately leads to what the greatest generation faced in World War II. That's where this leads. It took on different faces. Some of it was Hirohito worship. Some of it was fascism in Italy. Some of it was Nazism in Germany. But the root of it was the same. Some people are just more special and better than others. And you are not uniquely created in the image of God. You are not created equal, as our founding document says. Some people are just meant to be more equal than other people. And ultimately, when you give those people a military and the opportunity to coin money, they're going to act on their beliefs. And the greatest generation saw that, and they saw the worst examples of that. And so at a place called Nuremberg, they put those people on trial. And they put those trials in front of the whole world as much as you could with mass media in the late 1940s at the time. You had radio, TV was just beginning to become immersed in the culture. But you'd see clips, you'd go to the movies, you'd see clips of Nuremberg. People knew the names of the people they put on trial. And then then they held those people accountable when they were convicted. And some of them, frankly, they executed because they wanted to set an example. This can't ever happen again. And for the most part, with the exception of the Iron Curtain and a few hot spots in the world, for the most part, the idea of a biomedical fascist state, the idea of a medical nationalism of human beings that are scientific chattel to be tinkered with, not uniquely created beings to be protected and provided for. For the most part, for the next 80 years after that code that they wrote following that event, held up. And not coincidentally, we had arguably the greatest era of medical scientific advancement in all of human history. We took human ingenuity, modern technology, but we tethered it to a moral code and said, here are your boundaries. Don't go outside of them. Stay on mission. And what you saw beginning with Obamacare, I believe, where the relationship between and the freedom that your individual doctor had to treat you is largely eradicated now. Men are going to pay for pap smears. We're going to have community ratings. You're a number now. They don't treat you as a patient. They have CDC guidelines. The Fed set the guidelines. The Fed set the coverages. Sure, you still have insurance, but really it's from a private company, I guess. But the Feds are running the show. It really is a single payer system. And with that in place, we have this medical emergency called COVID. And when tested, frankly, the system in many places just lost its humanity. And it was okay to take, it was okay to say things like baby aspirin was suddenly dangerous. Budenocide, dangerous. Hydroxychloroquine, dangerous. Ivermectin, I don't know, maybe it works against COVID, maybe it doesn't. But now Merck, which won a Nobel Prize for the drug in 2015, is now telling you it's dangerous. Get the F out of here with that. Okay. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that anything we came up with is dangerous because the law says if there is something already on the market that is an effective treatment, you can't have emergency use authorization for an experimental technology. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that it just so happened for 9 months during the worst pandemic, you couldn't have anything. You couldn't have a nebulizer for respiratory inflammation. You couldn't have a steroid. I'm an asthmatic. I know a lot about respiratory inflammation. I fought it my whole life. All you could have is a ventilator that doesn't do anything for you, and you were lucky to live if they gave you one of those. So it's amazing. And it's amazing that you could have nothing until they came up with these experimental technologies from companies like Moderna that had never even successfully brought a product to market before. They got billions of dollars from Operation Warp Speed. And this is because now the greatest generation has passed on, and the remaining generations don't remember things like Nuremberg. And that's why we wrote our book, rise of the Fourth Reich confronting COVID fascism with a new Nuremberg trial, so this never happens again, because that's what it's going to take. If people are not punished, you always get more of what you don't de-incentivize, or less of what you don't incentivize. And there is no de-incentivization to just treat people like this, to lie about it. No one's been punished for it. And that's what it's going to take. I mean, a basic thing is, hey, if your products are so great, no more liability protection then.
And let's not forget that over 1,200 public health officials signed a letter stating that anyone who is protesting the lockdowns and the mask mandates and the other draconian decrees from the little Mussolini wannabes are actually promoting white supremacist ideology. So if you use your First Amendment right to petition the government for redress of grievances, to protest against them, if you exercise freedom of speech, then you're a white supremacist, apparently, according to these public health officials. But the reality is all this happened because there's no accountability in the system anymore. Accountability is something that is far gone within this country, unfortunately. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to talk about that lack of accountability, and I have two questions for you. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Listen up, P.A.S. report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed. So they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat, it's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? Food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stock easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4Patriot survival food by typing in the code PAS at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com. Use code PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And Steve, my first question now is, were you surprised at how blindly and obediently the American people followed each and every one of the decrees, even though the government was actually violating nearly every single constitutional right, particularly the first 10 amendments? That's what I'm talking about. Just about every single one of those was being violated. You had the governors instituting their decrees on people, and the people didn't even ask questions. They didn't raise any alarm bells. They just said, okay, this is what we're told to do, so we're going to do it. Are you surprised by that?
No. Here's why. We've lived for the last 50 years by judicial fiat. Elections are largely nullified. You just run to an unelected judge somewhere. They decided they have a made-up universal injunction power that doesn't exist in the Constitution. They have been taught in law school that a court determines its own jurisdiction. Stare decisis has been warped from the study of precedent to I am my own precedent, and it's ever evolving. How you like them apples? Yep. So, I mean, that's how we've lived for decades. That didn't surprise me. But there was something that did surprise me. I did think taking away our decadence, particularly in the spring and summertime, taking people's vacations away, leisure pursuits away, the stuff that, people these days define makes them an American, not, liberty, freedom, self-government, the accoutrements, the spoils of it. Taking those things away and say, enjoy Tiger King on Netflix, I never envisioned for that long people would tolerate. Yeah, neither did I. The fact that now they can even take our creature comforts away and we'll still roll over. Now, we're in, as they said in one of my all-time favorite movies, we're in the end game now. All right. So if now they can take your creature comforts away and still you'll patronize them and roll over like a dog. I mean, I know how many guys with their 42-inch pythons listening to Joe Rogan. And I like Joe's show, but hey, listen to Rogan. Yeah, man, Civil War, bro. And then they made sure their little Missy was wearing her mask dutifully when they went to Costco every week. All right. That tells you right there that the compliance regime, the lack of critical thinking, the decades of conditioning in the school system. We used to have culture wars in America where people like Steve Deace and Bill Maher went to war with each other because they were both critical thinkers that came to dramatically different critical opinions on their thinking. Now what we have is Steve Deace and Bill Maher sound almost exactly the same, even though many of their viewpoints are in opposition, because they see that no one critical thinks anymore. We're not even permitted to critical think anymore. I'm not permitted to dissent from anything. Bill Maher and I showed up for an argument. Now they don't want us. Don't want to let us argue. You just simply comply. I mean, corporations are evil unless they're called Pfizer and Moderna, and they want to. And then I am their never-ending human experiment. Corporations are evil unless they're called Disney, and then suddenly they're a victim. Okay, I mean that is the highest virtue in our society. Used to be merit, achievement, compassion, critical thinking, ingenuity. Now it's compliance, and you see this imposed heavily in social media. The same people that are now sharing their pronouns were previously sharing their Vax card, were previously picturing themselves in a beekeeper costume and called it a mask. Previously were and then also made sure to tweet out their I stand with Ukraine. It's a repeat. It's on repeat. I am complying. I'm one of the good people. Recognize my obedience. That's what it is, and that's freaking scary.
But isn't part of the problem that the religious institutions also didn't push back? I mean, the government was determining when, where, and how we practice our faith. And yet the religious institutions, I mean, I didn't hear anyone push back. In fact, most of them said, we have to do this to stop the spread. And I think that's a big part of it. If we look at the pews today, they're nowhere near what they were prior to COVID.
Nope.
And I think part of it is people have lost faith in the religious institutions as being the guardians, the protectors, the pushback against government. And then the other part were never really religious to begin with. They were just the casual attendees. Mm-hmm. And the government systematically destroyed faith in this country.
Absolutely. This has frankly, I would put all the blame at the feet of the church, because it is an institution, my belief system says, directly ordained by God, specifically to stand athwart time and space, to be really a lighthouse, to be a light shining in the darkness, regardless of form of government, regardless of custom and culture and language it's in. It is anyway, supposed to represent in a message that transcends all of those things and challenges, therefore, those things when they go awry, which is why every totalitarian regime for the last 1,500 years, one of the first things it's done is banned Bibles, because they didn't want people to have access to that light, to start thinking for themselves, to be inspired that they were maybe not a ward of the state. They were created by a benevolent God who has a purpose for them, a plan for them, and this ain't it. And so the fact that the church went along with it, I'm an evangelical, many prominent evangelical leaders went along with it, chastised evangelical leaders who did not, heavily promoted this hack, Francis Collins at NIH, as one of us, and listen to him and roll over. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't you dare ask any critical questions. The most extreme example is what you saw in Germany in the 30s. But ultimately, this level of tyranny in a free society cannot emerge if the church is vibrant and active. It simply can't. It only does when the church is not. And if you look at Western Europe, most of the old Catholic cathedrals are either empty or mosques. Only 2% of the French population is evangelical. 2%. So we're heading towards those demographics right now in the U.S., which is why on my show I say all the time, revival or bust.
And do you think that's what has led to the lack of accountability? I mean, Afghanistan alone, not a single person was held accountable for that failure. 20 years of war, 2,500 soldiers' lives taken, tens of thousands wounded. And we've heard, we're making progress. The Afghan government could stand on its own. The Afghan security forces could defend the government. We were fed that for 20 years. And then it all collapsed in less than a week. And not a single person held accountable. Do you think that epitomizes the state that we're in?
In human history, justice is upheld from one of two premises. And one, often in pagan cultures, it was upheld through what was known as an honor culture. And so you see the examples in Asian cultures, for example, where I've shamed my family. We drink hemlock at the end. Okay, the classic Sophocles plays of ancient Greece, like Agamemnon. I shamed my family, and so I drink the hemlock at the end. All right. Now, I don't support that level of, that's going too far, I would say, as a Christian. But they recognized in pagan cultures they had to come up with some higher ethic. Otherwise, they just have the chaos and lawlessness that we have now. And so a lot of times in those countries, whether it was the shogun or the samurai in the East or the warlord in the Middle East, whether it was the king and the vassal and the feudalism of Western Europe in the Middle Ages, there was some form of an honor culture installed in these places. So expectations that transcended you, that affected your descendants, that your expectations your ancestors left you with, you were expected to live up to that. So you did not succumb to your craven-based nature. In the Judeo-Christian world, we have the laws of nature and nature's God. We have God's revelation. We have the Bible. We have the scriptures. We have church history. We have the church fathers, things of that nature that guide us. And we don't have either one of those things in our culture right now. We are an honorless culture, so we don't even have a pagan extreme warped version of it. And we've completely abandoned the Judeo-Christian foundation that was supposed to guide such things as justice and law and protect us against lawlessness in the past. We don't have either one. And that's why you see the complete chaos, the nihilistic chaos that we see right now, where everything's just a will to power. There's no justice.
Yeah, you got to hope that people start coming to their senses soon. I mean, they're going to come to their senses sooner or later. The question is going to be, is it going to be too late at that point? Will it be enough people? And will it even be the right people, right? Will it be the right people? One of the problems we have right now is we probably still outnumber them in sheer numbers, but our people live in places like Evansville, Indiana. Their people live in the major metroplexes and disproportionately populate all of the major and most influential institutions. And so we can outnumber them in sheer numbers, but they are positioned in all the places where influence and power is actually wielded. We're not. Yep. Hey, I'm in academia, so I'm surrounded by
So you know better than me, brother. Absolutely. Yes.
Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. We're going to have links up to your work on the website. Thank you so much for coming on.
You bet. Glad we could finally make it work. God bless you.
I really appreciate Steve taking the time to come on the show. I encourage everyone to go to the theaters, watch Nefarious. I also have the links up on the website where you can connect with Steve and get his books. As I said at the start of the episode, I am working on an explosive episode for Wednesday, so be sure to tune in. As always, please share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. If you find the podcast informative, take 30 seconds to write the P.A.S. report a good review and leave a 5-star rating. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.